Hey guys, welcome back to the Sanctuary. I had the great honor today to sit down with rock star Sideshow sculptor Will Harbottle for a solid 2 hours in an interview ranging from his early influences, how he got into sculpting, some of his current projects. We took a deep dive on Power Girl and Harley Hell on Wheels and just had a great time. Turns out we're both the same age, had similar upbringings. I really want to thank Will for taking the time, and I want to thank Sideshow for making it possible. I had a blast. I hope you enjoy it. Strap in, 2 solid hours with Will Harbottle. I hope you enjoy.
Fan films. Anyway, so it's fun. Yeah.
So what I'd like to do is explore like the secret origin of Will Harbottle.
Okay.
And I think that a really good way to get to know someone is to find out what pop culture they were consuming as a child.
Yep, I was thinking the exact same thing. Yeah.
And I think that you started reading comics very early.
Yeah. I literally remember the very first comic book I ever picked up.
Tell me about that.
I wasn't interested. Just wasn't on my radar screen. I like to draw.
Yeah.
And I was probably, we got to be looking at 1973, 4, something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
We were out camping with a bunch of other families. I was bored. I think it was rainy or something like that. So I walked up to the local, place where you get food and snacks and little shop.
Right.
And they had one of those wire racks. Spinner rack, and pulled out Giant Size Avengers Annual number 4 or something like that, which was a reprint. I found out many years later. I didn't know. I'm 8 years old. It's a reprint of like a comic from 1969, I think.
Okay.
But it was mind totally blown because it was huge, and there were like 4 stories that were kind of somewhat woven together. But to this day, it affected me so deeply.
Right.
Every character that's in that, no matter how obscure they are, became a favorite. And I just, everything goes back as I was thinking about coming to hang out and talk with you.
Yeah.
I was reflecting back on some of these things like that, and I don't think I quite even appreciated until that reflection how much that particular comic book meant to me. I would love to do an Ultimo. Do you know who Ultimo is? Big bad guy. He was paired up with the Mandarin in that comic.
Okay.
And he's like a giant. He lives in a volcano or something like that. He's like 50 feet tall.
That sounds cool.
He's got these pumpkin teeth, gray with Anyway, I was like, because he was the big bad guy in that thing, and all these characters. But anyway, my lifelong love of the Avengers started then. So there was that, and then really within a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years later, the blink of an eye, when you're a kid, I saw Star Wars. And that really changed everything. To give you an idea where I was, I started to get into comic books, but they were very inaccessible to me. I grew up in Ohio, and there was no place to go.
Right.
We would get on our bikes.
No local comic shop.
No, nothing like that. And no way to get there. You know what I mean? But to touch on Star Wars for a minute, to give you an idea where I was.
Sure.
Another rainy day in the summer. What are we gonna do? Well, shoot, let's go see a movie. And I was like, Bad News Bears, baby. We got to. Let's do that. I know. I was playing Little League and stuff like that. And so I was like, we got to see the Bad News Bears. And for one reason or another, we couldn't.
Okay.
I was crushed. I'm like, this is back in the days when things got sold out and stuff like that. You know what I mean? You'd wait in the long line and everything like that. I actually missed those long lines because it made it such an event to go see. When you saw you're driving down the street, what's that? Oh, that's a line for Rocky. Or, oh, that's a line for Jaws. You remember that? And it was like,
totally.
That line goes all the way down the street.
Yeah.
And that was exciting, So anyway, so it may have been sold out. But anyway, the only other option was Star Wars. I'm like, Star Wars?
That's so funny.
It's so dorky, like space stuff or whatever. And I still remember so vividly that day, sitting in the theater, like really bummed, what is this going to be? And then the music.
Yeah.
And when that ship starts going to the top, my eyes got this big around. I'm like, I've never seen anything like that. I've never, ever seen anything like that. And as luck would have it, the film broke like 5 or 6 times. I mean, to the point where like you're
no.
watching, and you'd see it like break. But it was actually really awesome because my friend and I turned to each other. Did you see that? Oh my God! Did you? And so we could talk about it during the thing.
You saw a serialized version of
Right,
Star Wars.
right there. I mean, it would only last like 2 or 3 minutes each time. Or one time I remember we actually had to step outside for 5 minutes or something like that, and then we were just like, oh my God! I remember tripping over my words so much because I couldn't get them out of my mouth fast enough because it was so cool. It was right after the scene where they're like shooting the TIE fighters from the Millennium Falcon, and they're like, and again, I never seen anything like that. So boom, the film breaks. I'm like, oh my God! Did you see that thing? Was so cool. Yeah. Anyway, so between those two things, that was really formulative to me, and it's funny. So back to the spinner racks.
Yeah.
So then what do you do? You go. I loved comic books and I saw Star Wars, but it's not like you could go on the internet or there was our resources were really limited.
Yeah.
And there was the local equivalent of a 7-Eleven that was like 3 miles away.
Right.
Bike, so we could get on our bikes and that'd be a big adventure. We would bike out there, and it was pure spin rack. That was it. That was the only place comic books. And man, you got the picked over leftovers from ever. And consequently, I've always felt bad that I feel like I grew up in the golden age of comics. I mean, just everything was so great. Everything was great. Yeah. But I never really connected with the artists and the writers in a way that I would now because there was no continuity. On a spinner rack, first of all, I wouldn't go up there every day or every week. It'd be every couple of weeks, and you would just get everything that you could fit into your backpack and afford. Yeah. But so to me, it was always titles. Yeah. It was Avengers, and I never really stopped to think, well, there's some person writing these things, and there's and that's a job, and there's some person drawing these things, and that's a job.
Didn't play it up back then.
Yeah, no, right, exactly. Meanwhile, they were geniuses cranking out this stuff. I mean, weekly and monthly, cranking out such amazing stuff.
Right.
But to me, it was just the Avengers, and I didn't know who was drawing it or who was writing it, or it was X-Men. I do remember some specific moments, that really stood out to me, like X-Men, that first issue when all the new X-Men show up. I think it's 100 or whatever. And they're all lined up on each side, kind of facing off.
I bought that off a spinner rack.
I bought that off a spinner rack too, and I still have that copy. I mean, it's all like spindled and mutilated and stuff. Because how then I participated, with it was drawing. Okay. A lot of tracing. So all my early comic books have the indentation of like the, from where I drew.
Jim Lee said the same thing at Comic-Con last weekend.
No kidding.
That's how he started.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so.
Good company.
There's a future. There's a future in it, apparently. Oh gosh, I remember taping it, to like fold it all back and tape it to the window and put a piece of paper so you get good backlight, and so you could trace it well. Yeah. But that's how it started, and then, as I got a little too cool for comics at around age 13 or 14, I lost touch with them for about 5 years. Between 13 and so.
This is how we first connected.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but after I did the Elektra review.
Right, yeah. That was a great review. Yeah.
And you had contacted me because we kind of connected
on that. That's right.
I to be a little cooler in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I appreciated you were filling me, you had provided some backstory details that I was not even aware of. I'm like, oh man, I wish I knew that when I was working on things. Lost touch throughout high school, but continued art, it was just, but at that point I was interested in, fine art, or whatever. Yeah. Got accepted to art school miraculously in New York City, so I went to Parsons School of Design, and it was when I can remember this too. It's funny how these moments burn into your memory that were so formulative, because here I was, art school, too cool for school, and my buddies were all like, oh my gosh, have you checked out Batman? And I'm like,
this happened to me. I
was like, Batman? Yeah. And they're like, yeah, there's this dude writing Batman. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I haven't read a comic book in 5 years. What are you talking about? Right. They're like, no. You got to check out Frank Miller. Yeah. And that was the first artist and property that I put together, because man, was that different. I was like, what happened to comic books in the last 5 years? Well, Frank Miller is one of the things that happened to them, because I mean, there's like blood in this comic book. I mean, like that guy really took a beating, or that guy really gave it. Like, that's real. That's different. I don't remember that. I remember the real. Like, I always liked certain comic books that had a bit of reality to their human interaction. That was what appealed to me the most. You know, I love the Avengers drama between Wanda and Vision and Wonder Man and all those guys. Like, I loved all that stuff, you know what I mean? You know, I loved the adventuring and the powers and all that kind of stuff, but I also connected to just like my version of a soap opera, you know what I mean? Getting to know all these characters. Anyway, but Frank Miller was a whole other thing where, like, people, there's consequences to getting older and to, and you know, what if this was really, really real? And he was an older superhero, and like, what would that, you know, how would he deal with that? And I never thought about any of that kind of stuff before.
So it was this Daredevil that got me back in.
Okay.
My best friend said, dude, you're screwing up. So he lent me Daredevil. See, he started doing the art in 158, and he started drawing it in he started writing it in 168.
Okay.
And so he lent me those issues, and I was blown away. And I say it all the time, I think our generation is the first generation where comics grew up with us.
Yeah, right. We were right. Yeah.
So
no, it makes sense.
We have always been able to appreciate it at every age.
Oh, yeah.
That's been important to me.
That's an interesting perspective that I hadn't thought about before. Yeah.
Yeah.
They grew up with us.
And television kind of too.
Yeah.
Television was pretty vanilla when we were, it was, you know, Brady Bunch and stuff like that. And then I remember, I think I was 15 years old, going to TV a little bit, when Hill Street Blues came on.
Right.
When I was really young, and I watched that first episode, and my first thought was, where do they find all these great actors? And it was a while before I realized it wasn't the acting, it was the writing.
Yeah.
That Bochco was really bringing a far grittier reality to TV than we'd ever seen before.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of, you know, went from that to St. Elsewhere was another great one. And
I watched Hill Street. I don't remember. I remember St. Elsewhere, but I didn't watch that one.
It took place in a hospital, and it had the same kind of gritty elements that Hill Street Blues had.
Tie it together for me. So we went from Hill Street, and then we eventually were heading towards The Sopranos, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
But like, what for you was in between there? What were the in your teen years? What was your TV that?
I literally ran home from work to get to Hill Street Blues, and I you know, had a VCR, and I would record them and hit pause so I wouldn't get the commercials in. I wanted to have commercials, which is hysterical. And so I had like.
So you made your library of commercials.
A library of Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere with all the commercials omitted.
Oh wow.
Omitted. I can't remember all the shows off the top of my head.
Yeah,
but it was that. But it was the character interaction. It wasn't the stories necessarily.
Yeah.
Just got a lot more adult.
Yeah.
And like I said, grew up with me. It's been awesome with comics to not have to give up comics ever again.
Yeah.
You know, I go to San Diego Comic Con every year and just have, it's like heaven for me.
Yeah.
It literally is. And for my friend Ty. So
I not to interrupt you, but speaking of comics continuing to give, I had another big resurgence into comic books in the early 2000s with Mark Millar, and I really loved the Ultimates.
Oh yeah.
Being an Avengers fan, and I was just the right age. I don't know, I was 40 or something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
When I read the Ultimates, I was like, "Oh, this is how I remember."
Yeah.
You know, filling in all the other stuff. You know, when I was 13 in my imagination. Well, here it is on the page. You know, this is more Avengers than the Avengers really was, because this is how I remembered it. Yeah. So well, and it's, you know, no surprise that the MCU to me grew out of that era of, you know, 2000 to 2010 comic books to me. I mean,
right.
The storylines are drawn from there, and the characters are like, you know, Hulk was never more hulky to me than he was in the Ultimates. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, like I said, when I was imagining Hulk from the comic books when I was 13, that's the Hulk that I filled in the gaps with. You know, crude throwing people through, and I still remember that fight that he had with Giant Man or whatever, and he's like in his mouth trying to pull his mouth open and stuff. I'm like,
so what do you think about Hulk in the MCU? Do you think that they've kind of taken away that rage element? Do you think that's good for the character, or do you wish that we had a more traditional Hulk in those movies?
I love the MCU. I mean, I'm really very, very satisfied with all that. So it's hard to wish too much was different. Although, there's room for that Hulk to emerge in another storyline too. He could still be there, and because it's not a total deviation from the character they've created. I mean, we could do a rage storyline where he just, which would be fun. You know what I mean? But no, I really have dug a lot of the MCU. I mean, I really thought that has been successful.
I hope they can keep it up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Can you imagine juggling that many balls that skillfully for that long?
Yeah.
It's tough. I mean, I think about my daily life, and okay, so we gotta, this is what we have to do to make a successful statue, and we gotta tick these different boxes and try to keep it all the balls in the air,
Right.
And we'll probably touch on some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it is nothing like making a movie. I mean, first of all, that $200 million budget, and then, you don't have
the stress.
Well, and then what they're doing, which is making 20 movies all work together. But I wasn't sure. I was curious to see where they were headed with it, and then I wasn't able to make it to Comic-Con this year, and haven't for the last 2 years, but next year hopefully. But seeing all the stuff coming out, the coverage and the trailers and stuff like that, I was pretty stoked with what's coming down the pipe. I mean,
it's exciting.
Yeah, and they've earned my trust, big time. So
as far as books, I get the feeling you were probably a voracious reader. You read all the John Carter novels.
Yeah, yep. That was filling in the gaps, because you didn't have any other choices. I'm like, come home from Star Wars, like, I I need more. Right. And so, I really went on a quest, and that's when my reading exploded. It's actually, not to digress, but my reading took over so much that's when I thought I wanted to be a writer. Did you see my artist profile? They kind of do a little blurb. So yeah, I mean,
they did a very good job on that.
I spent a long time thinking that's where my passion was writing, because I got into reading so much, that grew out of the comics and the movies. But John Carter was big. Of course, all the usual suspects. Lord of the Rings, center of my world. Dune, Foundation. I loved a writer called Larry Niven.
Sure.
Ringworld and all that stuff. I actually really fell in love with all the Ringworld books, and to this day, if Larry, if you're out there, write another Ringworld book, I'm reading it. I read them all. I just am fascinated by that other world building stuff. As you can see, Dune, Foundation, those are all world building kind of things.
Robert Heinlein at a very young age. I had a lot of those.
I never read too much of him. I just never connected. I never had, he wasn't on my radar screen.
I don't know how he got on mine. I probably spotted a cover that I liked.
Yep, right.
But we had a local used bookstore, and I would bring in old books that my mom had read, didn't want anymore, and trade them.
They are some of the most revered books, and I have to, one of these days, we'll go on vacation, I'll sit on the beach and I'll read a few, have a moment, because
I think in one of them he borrowed from John Carter heavily.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which one was that?
I don't know. I have to look it up.
Yeah.
I was reading up on him just the other day, and they talked about, I was reading up on John Carter.
Oh, okay.
And they talked about several other media that had borrowed from that.
Well,
including Star Wars.
And everybody borrowed from Heinlein. I mean, he was so, archetypal in his writing. But, I know of all the books, Stranger in a Strange Land and Moon is a Harsh Mistress and all those books. But, I just never, frankly, I don't think I ever really picked one up. I just, I never had it in my hand to read,
Any horror? Stephen King or?
Read some Stephen King. I read, a handful. Wasn't really my cup of tea.
Yeah.
My appetite for, and he's not necessarily this way, but my appetite for the gruesome, for the gore, I should say, I lost younger. You know what I mean? Like when I was in high school, of course, we'd see Friday the 13th and Halloween and all that kind of stuff. Loved them. I mean, I remember seeing all that stuff in the theater.
Right.
And really dug it. But
it was the 80s. It was like no better time for horror movies.
Oh man.
Every week. And
speaking of which, Stranger Things.
Oh my gosh.
Love. We were super late to that party. I mean, Kat and I, our daughter is 11. So we had a bunch of years there where it was hard to watch movies, and TV because,
I totally get that.
We wanted to hang out with her, and certain things are probably older than her age is appropriate and stuff like that. Especially the scary stuff. So anyway, we're catching up on a lot of things. But it's just within the last 6 months or whatever that we sat down to Stranger Things, and we're just like, after every episode, we're like,
it's so cool.
Oh my God, they hit every note so well, and just where did that come from? But I didn't even know that I was missing that until I saw it. You know what I mean? Like, where has this been all my life? You know what I mean? Or where has this been for the last 40 years?
And I love the 80s setting. And I love that they bring back actors that were popular. Matthew Modine.
Oh, great.
People that you haven't seen in a while, maybe. Yeah. And it's something that, my 15-year-old can love and I can love. So we all watch it as a family.
Yeah.
And I guess there's only one more season next year and that's it. But, man, just wonderful stuff. Yeah,
and turning the screw, season 1, okay, that was really neat, and then 2, and then 4 was like, whoa! I'm such a nerd for that stuff. After season 4 finished, I'm like, okay, I'm downloading all the Kate Bush, I'm downloading all all this stuff, because, just to listen to while I'm exercising or doing whatever, so I got the whole soundtrack playing and everything. Speaking of which, I'm addicted to soundtracks in general. That's what I spend my day listening to while I'm working and stuff like that.
I'm going to ask you about that.
Oh, okay.
So your voracious reading led to 15 years of trying to make it as a writer.
Right.
And what I'm curious about is you mentioned that you were interested in art at a young age. You were tracing comics and stuff. But what was the aha moment with sculpting? What was the event where you actually put fingers in clay and did something?
Yeah. So I'm fully believing that writing is the thing for me. I'm deep into it, but I got to pay the bills. Yeah. And writing was a long way off from that. Yeah. Even I knew that with what I was interested in writing, that was never going to pay the bills anyway. Because I was looking at, I wanted to write like not pulpy books, but I thought that I was going to be an artist, you know what I mean? Challenging books, and of course, the more challenging, the better. And I'm going to punish the hell out of my reader. I'm going to make them earn every moment. This is what I was thinking at the time. I look back and go, boy, I would have given myself such a better opportunity if I had a different attitude about it. But it was all personal. It was all about me. I needed to prove to myself and the world that I had something to say, and when if somebody sat down with my book, I wanted to reward them with just as everything I'd ever thought of. Okay. And so my book project just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's why I was complimenting you for being able to get your arms around something to finish it, because for me it was the opposite. It just kept growing, and then the more time I had invested into it, the more I had to justify. I've been working on this thing for 10 years. It better really be, so it just got to be this huge, oppressive thing. Anyway, but to pay the bills, to get back to your question, I did a variety of things. I was a potter for a long time. Things that I could control myself. Yeah. And then that led to, I met a woman who had a glass blowing business, and the tabletop variety. We have a big torch, and you're like, you got the wands, and you're kind of working with liquid glass, but not in the glory hole. Not that kind of thing. So we made we did very well for ourselves. We made glass high-end serving utensils.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, it was neat. Nordstrom and Saks Fifth Avenue and all this kind of stuff. But
Sure.
anyway, so I paid the bills. I did that for like 10 years
Oh, wow.
while I was working on writing. And we were in this building that was all artist spaces, like 200 different artist spaces, a converted old building. And
That sounds fun.
it was neat. Yeah, people who did everything. There were people who made chocolate
Right.
in one place, and then
Oh,
and just
cool.
everything. This was in Hoboken, New Jersey, which
Yeah.
I loved. So down the hall, there was this toy prototyping studio, and I went down. I forget. I bumped into them, and they said, "Well, come in and check it out." And their place was really cool. Not knowing that this world existed, and now it's been quite a while since I had lost touch with my childhood roots of comics and science fiction and stuff like that. It had been a while now.
Yeah.
So we open up this big double door. I remember this so well. And they had a gallery. It was probably a little bit bigger than this room, but like this.
Okay.
Full of everything they did. And I remember going, and it was super dark with like lit. It was made to look like we were in a cave.
Right.
Cause,
That's awesome.
I was like, what the hell is all this stuff? And they're like, this is what we make. And I'm like, and I had this was my first aha moment about all this stuff, is like,
Yeah.
you mean somebody sculpts action figures? Somebody that sits down and sculpts these things.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, well then no shit. I mean, like, I'd never thought about that before. I mean, I was like, wait a minute, somebody sculpted this bottle. I never thought about that before. Like, just like a bottle just exists. It's just, just falls off a tree, or I don't know. Yeah. And so I was like, wow. And so I started hanging out with them, and I was just kind of basically hanging out with them.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another. Like, hey, can you help us pour this resin or whatever? Oh, sure. Yeah. What the heck, man? And then that led to, can you help us pour resin a lot more often? So I started off in the mold room, which was really cool because, man, you learn how all this stuff works.
Right.
And then one day I was like, I want to give it a try. And so I didn't even tell anybody. I bought a lump of clay, and I'm like, what am I gonna sculpt? And so I actually sculpted this, to be honest with you. Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's the part of the base of a fountain in Rome, where they squirting the water out. It's the sea monster,
Sure.
the mythical looking sea monster. Anyway, so I'm like, what should I do? I'll do that. And that reminds me of how old that thing is.
So how old were you at this point?
This is probably pushing, 24 or 5 years ago, something like that.
All right.
Late 90s.
Okay.
So I just sat in my room and just did it. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool. This is so much fun. And it was pretty quick that it was within a few weeks, because, I showed that to them. They're like, oh, that's really neat. How about you help us with this? And so then that started to work into...
Your first project. That's amazing.
Yeah, just into different things. Yeah, so
Wow.
I helped them. They were prototyping some Marvel Legends action figures, and a lot of wrestlers, and it was all action figures, and things like that. Anyway, so I helped them out doing accessory here, doing bases, stuff like that.
Right.
And then worked up to doing some figures and stuff like that. But it was, like I said, it was pretty quick, really, that it clicked with me. Speaking of your aha.
Yeah.
Where I thought, I actually love doing this. It's fun to do.
Yeah.
And writing has never been fun to do.
Okay.
I liked having done something, and I liked sharing it, and I liked the product. I liked thinking of myself as a writer. I liked being a writer.
Yeah.
But I never loved writing. It was always such a damn pain and chore. It was very, very painful for me, and a lot of work, and and exhausting. And this never was. And so it was within a month that I packed up all my books, all my materials, and I still have them. They're in our attic.
Okay.
It's all just boxed up. Someday my daughter will be punished with, I'll be gone, and she'll be like, I wonder what Dad was really like. Oh my God, what is this nonsense? So I may have to throw it all away before I punish her with that, and she has to struggle trying to figure out what was going through my head when I was a kid. But anyway, and then I never looked back. It was just fun, unimaginably fun, just so cool. Like this is everything I ever dreamed of. I'm 13 again. And it doesn't get any better than this. And so that was, probably 10-ish years of traditional sculpting, wax and clay and all that kind of stuff. And I talk about this in that artist's interview thing. But my dad was a engineer and into computers and all that kind of stuff. I remember we drove from where I grew up an hour and a half away to Cleveland to pick up my dad's first calculator.
Oh, wow.
Because, big old, like crazy, with like, I don't even know what the logarithms and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
I don't know how that stuff works. Never was, I like math and I love science, but I never was educated that much in that stuff. Anyway, so my dad was, from day one, he had computers in the 70s and, all that kind of stuff. And so he's ahead on that kind of thinking. And since the day I started sculpting, he's like, they do this stuff on the computer, And I'm like, I got no interest in, I'm loving this.
Right.
Like I'm learning and growing. Like I finally found what I love to do.
Yeah,
and I'm slowly creeping up the ladder, I'm getting better and I'm seeing improvement. And like, this is really cool.
Yeah.
And as I told him many times, I'm a carpenter. I'm not an architect. I like making stuff. You kind of feel like an architect when you're working on the computer, like you're designing it and then it gets made someplace else. I felt that it would be very disconnected from the making of it, and I was having way too much fun making stuff.
Right.
But gosh, I'll remember this. So he and my mom came out to stay with us out here, and I hadn't spent an entire solid week living with my dad since I was like 18 years old. Boy, and he spent that week. You really should do it. No, you should check this out. Look what they're doing out there. I'm like, oh my God. And I was working at Gentle Giant at the time, who was very leading in. It was just starting off. There was a couple people at Gentle Giant who were doing it, but the door was open. If you wanted to learn how to sculpt on the computer, well, everything you needed was here. They actually had the printers and everything. Okay. By the time my dad left, I'm like, okay, I'll do it. But I knew myself well enough to know that I'm not really going to do it unless I burn the bridge behind me.
Oh, okay.
Until I get myself psychologically into a situation where I have to do this, because I know it's going to be tough. So I took all my life savings and I bought the software. Back in the day, back then, to buy Maya, which one of the programs, was like $5,000 cash.
Oh my gosh!
So it was no joke. Yeah. And then to get a computer powerful enough, and the one thing I'm really thankful for was I knew the transition was going to be so difficult that they have these big screens called Cintiqs where you draw on the screen. Okay. It's not a mouse or a pen on a pad that's beside you. Yes. You're literally on the screen, and I'm like, that feels familiar to me, and so let's do it. So I bought one of those too. So man, I'm 10 grand in. I'm 10 grand deep here. And that's
fully committed.
That's a lot. Yeah. There's no going back. And so let me try it. And oh my gosh, took 2 weeks off of work. Yeah. So I'm really going to do this. I'm going to come out of this. I want to be able to come out in 2 weeks and be able to have done something. Right. 2 weeks later, I'm like, this is the coolest thing I've ever been in my life. This is so amazing. Yeah. Like, I literally, I firmly believe I was better at the end of that 2 weeks than I as a traditional sculptor already. I mean, the doors were so wide open. I had gotten, after 10 years of traditional or thereabouts, you start to plateau a little bit, of course. I mean, there's just only so much better you can get.
Yep.
Your learning curve starts to level off. No one's making new wax or new clay that's going to change your life. Nobody's going to come up with a better sculpting tool that's going to blow your mind and change your life. You're pretty much locked in, and you're just refining what you do.
Right.
Computers, that learning curve is about this steep, and it'll go on forever.
Okay.
And I love that, because anytime you start to okay, I'm kind of getting a handle of that, Danny Bell will come along and go, oh, how about this? And you're like, holy crap, that is great. Okay, and rather than, at first, of course, it's very intimidating, but once you start to hit your stride, that the excitement of how quickly you learn took over for me. Right. And I was like, oh, I want this for the rest of my life. I want this feeling of out of control, just getting better and getting faster and easier forever, because it just feels so good.
Do you ever miss the clay?
No, never. I of course, I thought that was my reluctance. I thought that's what it was all about. That carpenter, getting my hands dirty stuff. But what I realized is the computers let me focus on the part that was the most fun of all more. So when you're sculpting in clay, 10% is the fun part. When you're doing the details of the face or whatever like that. But getting there, is 90% of the backbreaking work.
Right.
To relate it to digital, I always say, sculpting Hulk's hand, sculpting Hulk's fist. It's about one of the coolest things you'll ever do. I mean, it is so awesome. You can just get lost into and you're doing it, and you're acting it out as you're sculpting. Man, that is so cool, right?
Right.
Traditionally. But doing his left fist,
yeah,
is about equally as sucky. I just did the right hand. I don't want to do the left hand. No, that sucks. You know what I mean? Now I got to match that thing, and now I'm working again. I don't Anyway, so when you're traditional, there's some fun stuff, and then there's some stuff that's not fun. Yeah. But digitally, I get to cut off. I can just mirror it over, and then, add some nuances and stuff to make it different. But
sure.
I got to cut out all the part that I hate. And so now I get to sculpt a really cool one and a really cool one. You know what I mean? So there's that. It's the elimination of the stuff that's tedious, right, really, and allowing you to focus more time on the fun stuff. So, and the great thing about digital is Control Z. You can undo. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and you don't realize our generation can benefit from this stuff, but we still have fear baked in. When you're drawing by hand, if you make a mistake, it's sometimes very hard to recover. And what that does is it really inhibits your risk-taking comfort level. You know what I mean? Because, boy, it'd be really neat if that guy's head was smaller. But in order to make it smaller, I have to erase the head that's currently there. You know what I mean? And am I willing to do that? No, it looks good enough. You know what I mean? It looks good enough. Or or in the 3D world, man, his eye looks a little high. Or wouldn't it be cool if he was showing more teeth or whatever? But I can't risk it because I got to carve off his whole mouth to try it. Well, digitally, save, give it a whirl. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's funny. To this day, I find myself treating digital clay like real clay, almost well, I don't want to waste that. There's no wasting. There's no wasting. It's free. You know what I mean? There's no.
That's great.
And what's really neat is seeing my daughter. Her generation will grow up where Control Z is part of the fabric of her reality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I'm hoping that generation of artists will come along with no fear. Just absolutely, there's no downside to experimenting.
Right.
So do it. Give the person a bigger head. Give the person whatever, and just give it a try.
Right.
And I'm so curious to see what that. Some people, would say the downside of that is a little fear might be healthy to keep you focused, maybe.
I see that.
But I still think that the upside of fearless creation is going to be outweigh whatever downsides there are. But we'll see. But anyway, so I've rambled for a long time there.
No, that's good. So can you take me through a typical work day? What's it like for you?
They're fairly similar. I mean, I work on projects for a while. I'd say typically, thankfully, I work on whole projects. So sometimes they're broken up, and you'll work on a portrait, or you'll work on a base or whatever. But generally speaking, Sideshow is really good about giving a lot of us a whole canvas to work on. So anyway, so that consequently they can take a little while. I would say, the average time is probably something like 2 months, maybe, from sit down day one to the end.
But when you wake up in the morning, are you thinking, I'm going to work 8 hours today?
Yes, I have a very traditional work time and stuff like that. Even before COVID, especially before COVID, I worked in the studio, and I prefer that. The interaction and stuff. I'm a hermit, and I'm naturally shy and nervous, but I do like being around other people. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So get to work at the same time every day, work my 8-9 hours, and go home and work some more. Because my hobby is 100% what I do for my day job. I mean, on my weekends and nights, I'm making more stuff.
That's awesome. And what's your environment like? Are you listening to something? Are you snacking on something? What's it like?
Yeah, no, I listen to soundtracks almost exclusively since I went digital. Super weird. Okay. When I was traditional, it was all audiobooks.
All right.
And
that's interesting.
Yeah, but there's a competition for that part of my brain in the digital, and I still to this day can't quite figure it out. And every once in a while, a couple years, a year will go by, and I'll be like, that's stupid. I can listen to a book. Or I've heard Lord of the Rings 1,000 times.
Right.
I can just have, nope, super distracted. I'm finally like, I haven't even moved my hand in 2 minutes. What am I doing here? Anyway. So music has taken that place, and I miss the audiobooks because man, you can really chew through some great stuff. But
of course.
Music, it's all soundtracks, and this is actually one thing we hadn't touched on before. The third pillar of my childhood.
Yeah.
Star Wars, comic books.
Mm-hmm.
James Bond.
James Bond. I had no idea.
Huge fan of James Bond growing up. Absolutely loved everything. And where I'm getting to is the music. Mm-hmm. I just that's the James Bond soundtracks, especially up through the middle 70s and stuff like that. Is just the center of my music love. Everything traces back to dun 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 dun. I mean, it just all does. And so, but that's of course you have to fill it out. And now I have hundreds of hours of a lot of that era, but a lot of it is like Italian soundtracks from all those Italian mystery movies and all that, and then there's the German ones, and then and then there's the English, and then I got into.
Where do you find that stuff?
All over the place. You know what I mean? Like, one place was Pandora. I started listening to Pandora a million years ago, and here's the music that I like, and then they fill in all this other stuff. You go, oh, well, shoot, that's pretty good. You know what I mean? Like, dang, what's that? Oh, that's the soundtrack to Diabolic or whatever. Oh, I'll check that out. And and that kind of spun into what's called library music. Okay. Which I didn't know what this was, but there's once you start listening to it, you go, I recognize all this stuff. Okay. And because what it was is lower budget projects, no matter what they were, need the music.
Yeah.
And so there were a lot of musicians, really talented musicians, who would just write music and put it in this library, and then when somebody comes along and they need it, but so what they were writing is soundtracks to properties that didn't exist.
Okay.
So they would write, it'll be like called like, Shiny Spurs will be one of these songs.
Yeah.
There was no movie that was attached to. There was no property, nothing. But it sounds like music to a great Western.
It's very clever because then they can license that out to people.
Of course.
Yeah.
One place, one of the most famous library music song is the theme song to Monday Night Football. That's a British.
Oh, interesting.
That's a British library music song that was called like, exciting sports event or whatever. You know what I mean? And Monday Night Football in 1970 or 69 or whenever it started was not a big deal, and so they didn't have a budget to have a song written for them. So they went to the library and picked out, oh, this is some obscure English sportsy sounding thing, and dun 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 dun. It's just a piece of music. Anyway, so I fell in love with all that stuff, and so I just listened to that stuff. I think if I started Monday morning, I'd probably have 2 weeks of solid music I could listen to throughout. So anyway.
So you work on a project. I assume you submit a final render, and what I'm curious is that moment where you actually see the printed statue. Is that as thrilling with every single project as it's always been? And what's that moment like when you're actually seeing that?
It's a big difference. I mean, it's a super important moment, and I feel like a lot of my growth as an artist was my proximity to that print.
Okay.
Because a lot of artists, you may be anywhere in the world and you may not see the 3D print because it's printed. When I worked at General Giant, well, they were printing it down the hall.
Yeah.
And now, at Sideshow, we're getting the stuff printed and it's in-house, and you can, you can see it like you're there to open the box,
right,
to check it out, and it's really, really cool, and put it together and see how it fits. And that feedback loop of, oh, well, that didn't turn out exactly like I wanted to, or that texture far more subtle than I had hoped. You know what I mean? Next time,
So are you able to make any changes at that point, or
sometimes? Yeah,
okay.
It depends. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't, depending. But I always learn from it. You know what I mean? There are. Oftentimes we're out in advance enough from when the thing will be released and shown that we can make changes like that. Quite often.
Right.
But not always. Sometimes things just don't work out that way.
So we've seen a lot of new pieces from you
Mm-hmm.
in the past 9 to 12 months, I guess.
There was a dry spell. I had done all this stuff, but it hadn't hit the.
So Nightcrawler and Psylocke and the Phoenix and Jean Grey, and I'm sure I'm forgetting others. Power Girl.
Ghost Spider.
Ghost Spider. Yeah, there you go. So all of those are women except for Nightcrawler.
Right.
Is there a reason for that?
It's my.
Let me phrase it differently. Whenever someone on Facebook or Statue Forum, message board, wants a character that hasn't been done before and it's female, they always want Will Harbottle to do it. So
that's probably the answer to the question. Yes, because I hear that. I'm honored, very humbled and honored whenever I see anything like that. And yes, we're aware of that. It's my expertise. I was trying to think of the word to say it. There are not a million other people who do that. And we have, that thing's off, right? Between you and me, Danny, you just can't beat Danny. When it comes to a comic book superhero male figure, he's just so good. I've loved my friendship with him so much. We met, a long time ago, when he was, much younger, and but he was been such an inspiration to me. It was at the perfect time in my career. I'm like, I needed that young lion challenge. You know what I mean? And I'd see the stuff he was doing. I'm like, man, that's good.
Yeah.
Like, challenge. You know, let's crank it up. So anyway, so he's going to do very well at a lot of the male figures, and then Martine, legend, so good at primarily the male figures, and so they're going to execute extremely well a lot of those things.
Yeah.
And I do more of the ladies for that reason, but I love sculpting the guys. Like Gambit was one of the most fun things I've done. One of my favorite projects ever, which you don't have.
Which one? Thanos Unthrone?
No, I enjoyed that too. But Deadpool, I had so much fun on that thing. That was such a gas. Anyway, So I love working on the guys, and I do them when I can. I'm trying to think. There's at least 2 that haven't been seen. Okay. For whatever that's worth, a little teaser out there. Right. Of male figures. Yeah. Okay. But the majority will probably be, we were speaking a little bit earlier about our skill sets and our loves. And I was saying that one of the things I'm proud of is I may not be the best at any of these things, but I can be adequate in a bunch, and Voltron was my, I was really happy. My first 3 sculpts for Sideshow were the Batman, Christian Bale.
Dark Knight.
Yeah. In that kind of...
Underrated. Yeah. Good likeness on that one.
Thank you. But a movie piece, which is a completely different challenge. Mm-hmm. You're not making anything up. Your goal is to be as accurate as you possibly can. Yeah. So that was the first one. The second one was Red Sonja, so a sexy woman.
Yeah, that's a beautiful piece.
Thank you. And then Voltron.
Yeah.
So I'm like
totally different.
Completely, yeah. Just like 3, and I was like, wow, that felt really good to stretch my wings in those 3 different directions. But to get back to that, there are people out there who are just such brilliant robot sculptors.
Yeah.
That in a perfect world, you're going to pick the world's best robot sculptor.
Yeah.
And if he's not available, then you may get down to me at some point, which I'm super excited about. And we do so much product that it does get down to me eventually. But same thing, with the guys and whatever. But I love. It's really a lot of fun to be able to do all those different kinds of things. Like I'm ready for another robot. If anybody's listening,
That's awesome.
I really, really, there are things coming.
We have to talk about Dejah Thoris.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite statues. It's not currently here because YouTube hates Dejah Thoris. They like to delete videos.
Gotcha.
Anyway, but obviously this had to be a passion project for you. So can you talk a little bit about that and your relationship with that character? Yeah. And how I think that was part of a design team. I think it was you and a couple of others, is that right? Or was it mostly you?
The projects originate in different ways. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, hey, we got this, design, and we want you to do it. Awesome. Yeah. Sometimes we're going to do this character, but we don't really know. We're not set in stone yet. So help us explore.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, like with Dejah Thoris, I have the opportunity to go to them. Right. By them I mean Sideshow, the designers and the everybody who makes decisions at Sideshow, and super open doors. It's so awesome to be able to. You can just walk right into the owner's office and stuff.
That's cool.
Very, very, very cool. Literally, and I'm talking about literally. You just boom, boom, boom. Hey, are you in? And I got this idea. And always very receptive and very open with the information, so it's really neat. But anyway, so there was a case where I really want to do a Dejah Thoris, and we knew that Dejah would offer us some opportunities to do things that are harder with other properties. Okay. just to segue for a second, I have great respect for the people at Marvel and DC and Lucasfilm and all these places who are the custodians of these things that we love.
Yeah.
And sometimes there is a tendency to wish that they dealt with those characters differently, but they are looking at, these are characters that have been around for 100 years and will be around for 100 years, and how they evolve is difficult. In the changing world, and anyway, so I have great respect for all that stuff, and I firmly believe that great comic books and great statues and great movies are no less likely as they evolve. They just will be. It requires us to sometimes be cleverer in how we understand those characters or how we present those characters and stuff like that. But that being said, Dejah Thoris offers an opportunity to explore in different places, and one of those things being a little bit less clothing and a little more classical. How I thought about that piece from the beginning was absolutely a piece of classical art, but dressed, but as this character, who I grew up and loved, and we can talk about that in a second. But the character, John Carter, filled such a need for me growing up because there was so much, and it was one of those deals. It wasn't hard to pick it up at the bookstore. I come home from Star Wars. I love comic books. I love Star Wars, and more. And what do you see when you pull out the book at the bookstore? Frank Frazetta. You're like, well, cool. Everything's cool. Okay, so I read the first book and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. Very, very different to me. I love that. Serialized adventuring, you know what I mean? It's serialized. Well, I think they were actually written in serial form. And so there's cliffhangers all through it. Literal cliffhangers. Like boom. I remember, at one point John Carter falls off a roof or whatever, and you think he's dead. But his strap got caught on a piece of ornate architecture, and he's like hanging by his strap. I'm like, thank God. Anyway. But I loved all that adventuring. I know, that was the source for, one of the inspirations for so much stuff. Indiana Jones and Star Wars, and all that goes back to those simpler times. And the stories were perfect for a 13-year-old too. They have there's a. I don't want to say they're dated, but the world was very different back then, in terms of its expectations for stories and things like that. But at 13, you're loving all that stuff. Just the excitement. And gosh, I remember there's, not that spoiler if you haven't read them, but John Carter miraculously just wakes up on Mars. And then at the end of, I believe it's the first book, he wakes back up on Earth. And he's devastated. Whoa. And to get back to Mars, this gets me a little misty because it meant so much to me as a kid. To get back to Mars, he walks out into a field and looks up at Mars and just wishes until he's there.
That's awesome.
Because I can get my head around that as a kid. I want this so much. It's like you spend your whole life as a kid doing that. Like, if I could just get that, G.I. Joe. Oh God. It didn't happen. But for him, it happened. I'm like, see, it can happen. It does work.
Reminds me of Somewhere in Time, where the Christopher Reeve character wants so badly to go back in time to meet this woman.
Right.
He kind of wishes it to happen.
Yeah. So there was John Carter, who to me was just like the epitome of swashbuckly adventurer, honorable and cool, and not unlike James Bond. Really in a different, completely different worlds, but like cool, in control, skillful, all that kind of stuff. And Dejah Thoris I fell in love with because, first of all, she's just described as being the most beautiful person you've ever seen. So, so fill in the blank.
It's a good start.
Yeah, fill in the blank. Okay, I got that picture in my head.
Yeah.
But she was also really powerful and strong, and never, which looking back on those stories is surprising, never really felt like the helpless damsel in distress. I wouldn't have connected with her nearly as much if that's who she was. There are moments where, the wicked evil guy, takes her and sneaks her away and locks her up or something like that. And but given the chance, she could take care of herself.
Which is surprising for something over a century old.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Very, looking back on it, it just clicked with me as a kid. But looking back, that thing's 100 years old. That seems there was a lot of forward thinking in some of those pulp books back then. There's a bunch of them that was a golden age of pulp fiction. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But I really connected with her, and so getting back to the statue, I wanted to explore classical sculpture and art, but I also wanted, I thought it would be a great opportunity in this figure. There's a genre of classical art, a figure called an odalisque, what that is generally it's a reclining female figure, often scantily clad, and oftentimes she's like a harem girl or a slave girl or something like that.
Okay.
Every classical artist who ever lived did an odalisque. There's a famous painting by David when you see her back, and she's got this really long bare back, and she's looking over her shoulder. It's a super famous picture, painting. So I looked at all that stuff. I had all that stuff out there, and I really wanted to. But Dejah's no slave.
Right.
She's embodying. But same thing with Cleopatra was often an odalisque painting subject and stuff like that. When she was captured. But I really wanted to explore the queen side of her. Dejah is a queen, but beautiful and sexy and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I referenced all this artwork and not to belabor, but that was a fun challenge. That was one of the most satisfying things I had ever done. I liked. They gave me Sideshow really gave me a lot of room to move on that thing. And as you say, it was a labor of love and something that we have room to explore in that area. Let's just.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's a piece that, in my mind, demands a mechanized turntable because it really tells a story where you have this kind of alluring, extremely confident woman. But then as you turn around, you see the gun in her hand, which is really cool. And then if you look up, you realize the base is a celestial map, which I thought was brilliant. That's so important to those two characters.
Well, it's actually it's a map of Mars.
Okay. Right.
So it's a little more hidden than I had hoped, but it's you notice there's jewels in the floor.
Yeah. Right.
So it's actually, I'm forgetting his name. The guy who. So, Percival Lowell. So Percival Lowell, the astronomer, was looking at Mars through the old telescopes, and was convinced that he saw canals.
Okay.
And did all these drawings, and there was an Italian astronomer as well, and they were both doing these drawings of Mars, and they interpreted the dark lines as canals, and of course, that leads you to think, well, a canal isn't a river.
Right.
A canal is an artifact.
Yeah.
Somebody made that canal, and so I think Percival Lowell was doing his observations in the drawings in the 1890s-ish.
Okay.
Well, 5 years later, 10 years later, you have Mars Mania, and you have John Carter come along. They are really canals. This is a dying world. They have to get water from place to place. Yeah. It's a desert dying world, and this ancient civilization. So it grew, Dejah grew, John Carter, all those stories grew straight out of what was being sparked in the imagination from the scientific discoveries of the time. So I wanted to go back to that.
Yeah.
So I took one of, hopefully it's not copyrighted, but I took one of Lowell's 1890s drawings and of, Mars flattened out, and then I found a place that speculated where all the Martian cities were in the John Carter books, and so I put the diamonds where all the cities were, and I think that there's a different color, if I remember correctly, different color diamonds for where the green guys' cities were, the darks, and then the big diamond in the center, right underneath her chair, is helium, where she's the queen of. So anyway, that's anyway. If you look closely, that's a map of Mars drawn by.
I thought it would have been so easy just to do like a marble floor or something like that, but to make it that map, I thought was really cool.
That's a great example of why I love the collaborative qualities of what we do. We work in a building of 100 insane nerds. I mean, for different things,
right.
And the map idea, I had just my imagination isn't great. That's one of my weaknesses. So I just had a blank disc, and somebody came along and said, "Oh man, you should put a map on there."
Oh, cool.
And I was like, not only will it be a map, it will be a map drawn by a person below. Anyway, so
that's so cool.
Yeah, no, and that happens all the time. Okay. We're constantly talking, exchanging ideas and whatever, and no, it's very, very difficult for one person to produce a lot of great ideas. You need conversation, you need different backgrounds and different interests and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
brainstorming.
Brainstorming is really where, to me, the best ideas come from. And so, for her, there were a bunch of different ideas that came from all over the place. Deadpool was another one where I remember when I was working on Deadpool, we were all sitting in the sculpt room, all working and just shouting out ideas. And I remember Matt Black said, "He's got to have a selfie stick." And I'm like, well, of course he's got to have a selfie stick. I mean, like, duh. And, but that whole piece just came up with people throwing out crazy ideas.
Right.
And Rogue, hey, where's your Rogue? Man. Rogue is another one that I really enjoyed doing. But that was another thing that grew out of just brainstorming ideas and let's make her fly. Yeah, let's make her fly. How do we make her fly? And so that we got lucky on that one.
Rogue has a big base, and I've been thinking about her for so long. So where am I going to fit her?
Yeah, I'm just teasing you.
Yeah. Let's talk about portraits a little bit.
Yeah.
You've done a few actor likenesses, mostly comic based. How do you approach those differently?
Yeah. Pardon me. There's a similarity, actually. The way I work is pretty methodical.
Okay.
Like Danny, I keep bringing him up, but I'm envious of Danny because Danny will just take a ball, and an hour later it's Thor. And I'm like, what the hell, dude? Right. Oh, perfect. Go. Perfect example. Like that. I am much more methodical. Like I have to have orthographical reference views, and and so the program that we use primarily for sculpting is called ZBrush, and you can go transparent in your sculpt and then lay a picture behind. And so, if I'm working on an actor likeness, I have dozens of pictures of the person. The hardest likenesses are ones that don't have a lot of reference. That's really, really tricky.
Right.
So, usually there's enough reference around. So anyway, and so I just literally go transparent over it and sort of work on my sculpt based on that reference.
Yeah.
For a comic book piece, I will work almost exclusively with a designer named Ian McDonald, who is a genius for female faces.
Okay.
And I can't think of a face that we haven't collaborated on in years now. I mean, going back a long ways, because I'll do a rough draft, and some artists, if I was working with some people, they would just redraw your rough draft into what they saw. You know what I mean? And but Ian always takes my rough draft, you know, and I try to like go different directions based on the character and, you know, and whatever. And he just takes that rough draft and he'll do a draw over of her and make her pretty. And I'm like, how do you do that? Like, oh my gosh. But he respects where we start from. So I feel like, you know, I'm most proud when we have some diversity to the portraits, you know, that they look different, you know, that Wonder Woman looks different than Power Girl.
Yeah.
Because it's really, and so much of that comes from my working with Ian. So Ian, thank you so much. If you like, don't retire, I need you. But so it's the same thing. It's rounds back and forth of doing a draft, comparing it to the artwork, and then just back and forth.
Okay. Are you very self-critical? Do you look back on some of your past things like, God, I wish I could tweak that a little bit?
Yeah, I do. With almost every project, there's always something that irritates me about it. You know what I mean?
You hear about actors who never watch their films.
I do go back and I look because, again, unlike somebody who just starts with a sphere and goes, I sometimes do my rough draft by cutting apart some older pieces, and so that requires going back and looking at them. Right. Let me just for the rough draft purposes, let me grab this hair and stick it on there. So now we can kind of evaluate how the whole thing is working together. I do like to, whether it's a portrait or a whole entire piece, rough it all in and advance. I think this comes from studying art in art school and painting. When you're doing a painting, it's very uncommon to start at the left-hand corner and work your way down to the right-hand corner. Sure. You know what I mean? You kind of have to sketch it all in and then slowly let it all evolve together. And I find that the most successful statues are very similar like that, where you know, everything is there, even if it's in an early stage, and then slowly evolve it together, because you don't know logistical things like, well, that foot is running into that thing, so now we're stuck. Now what do we do? You know what I mean? But the foot is done. Or, you know, now that I see the costume evolving, you know, it looks better if she's turned or he's turned or whatever. So let's, you know, before we've locked in the pose and the anatomy and all that kind of stuff, and then just dress it, we need to see what, you know, she's got big shoulder pads. It looks funny if you're looking straight at her, you know, we got to turn her a little bit, whatever, those kind of things. And so let them all evolve at the same time.
So piggybacking on that, starting a project, I saw a Jim Lee panel in San Diego last week, and he always draws during his panels. And he hands out sketches to lucky people in the audience. Wow. Which is really cool.
Yeah.
And he was starting a Batman sketch, and he started with a line for the forehead, and then a line in to start the eye. And he said he always starts Batman that same way. And I wonder, is there a certain part of the piece that you always start with?
I'm sure there is, but I'm not sure that it's conscious. I mean, rough draft of the pose is the most critical part of any piece to me. Yeah. Some people, you know, it's been discussed throughout my career that, hey, you know, how can we have certain people focus on some things and not necessarily spend so much time on other parts? And one of the things was, well, we can have somebody like rough in the poses for you, and then you can do all the, and I'm like, to me, it's actually the opposite. Okay. Oh, you know, the pose and gesture and nuance of all that kind of stuff is way more difficult and important than the details on top. Because the details on top, you know, there are a lot of people in the world who can do that. But so to get back to your question, I spent a long time tweaking the pose and the forms and stuff like that. And actually, as a little behind the scenes, I've really benefited from reference scanning. And I'm talking about $200 little clip-on to your iPad that, spoiler, I pose myself for all
Awesome.
the ladies. Partly because I'm not using them for anything other than how they relate and trying to capture some of the gestures, nuances of gesture and pose.
Yeah.
So, and I can do that. But really, when I'm posing, this is so embarrassing to say. People are like actually picturing this in their minds probably now. Don't do that. No, don't do that. But I can feel it, and the memory of feeling it, of feeling the weight, informs the whole rest of the thing. And so I have that to look at, and it's a 3D thing. It's just like taking pictures for reference, but I can turn it, you know what I mean? And it's handier. And I'm in the world where I'm turning stuff all the time. So that, it just really works well for me. So, that's poses and gesture and all that stuff are the thing that I spend a lot of time early on, and that's what I always start with.
Right. Are there characters that you have already done that you would like to revisit?
I never thought about that.
I didn't say the questions would be easy.
Yeah. Well, you know what? What's really neat is the way my career evolved, and I started off with action figures.
Yeah.
And then, if you remember I don't know if you ever collected action figures, but Marvel did a whole line of 3 3/4 inch action figures.
Oh wow! Yeah, I'm not aware of that.
Tons of them, and that's when I was at Gentle Giant, and so I got to do crazy figures. So really, I got out of my system a little bit of. I got to sculpt every figure that I ever thought of. I got to sculpt Hulk. I got to sculpt Thanos. As a little guy, I got to sculpt Ironmonger, and you name it. I mean. Probably 50 or 60 characters, and a lot of them, kind of obscure and stuff like that. So that was my, so a lot of those I would like to go back and do in statue form. I mean, I've never done a Wolverine statue.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I did a couple action figures and stuff like that. So I'd like to crack it, it's not exactly revisiting because it's not revisiting it as a statue, but there are plenty of characters that I'd like to revisit that I've done before. And then there's characters like Red Sonja. It's just I click with Red Sonja. You know what I mean? You never met Kat, but
I haven't met her.
Yeah, my wife. I like strong ladies, and she's a strong lady, and and Red Sonja is a strong lady. I mean, she's sexy and whatever, and
we need another Red Sonja.
Yeah. Okay. Who knows?
We do.
So I would always be down for her. I can't think off the top of my head, but yeah, I'm sure there's millions that I tend to fall in love with who I'm working on.
Okay.
And so I don't always necessarily go into it knowing as much or being as attached to it as I am by the end. Good example of that is Voltron. I mean, I didn't know diddly about Voltron. He's not my era that I grew up in, and it wasn't my first choice to work on. But Dave Igo, the art director at the time, was a personal favorite character of his, and he said, will you do it? And I was like, oh, I'll do it, man. I'll do it for you. And but by the end, my first, not having grown up with him and not being attached to the character, I was like, this is a robot made out of cats. I mean, like, I can't get my head around that. Like, I just like But by the end, I'm like, this is a robot made out of cats, man. Did you see this thing? Like, that thing is badass, dude.
That sounds like Dave.
Yeah. So
really
no, yeah.
Well, should we look at a few pieces?
Sure.
All right, let's do that. All right, so I've dragged out 2 pieces. We've got Power Girl and Harley Hell on Wheels. These are both pieces, obviously, you sculpted, and I think, again, you were part of a design team on these.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? So let's just break it down to portraits, figure, base. What kind of went into the portraits on these? What were you thinking when you started?
Well, Power Girl, we knew we were going to do 2 portraits, and we wanted to reference 2 eras.
Yeah.
And I forget. I think it was in one of the original design sketches. Power Girl had a hairdo that reminded me of. We've talked about the music.
Yeah.
There's a genre of French music called Yaya,
Okay. Yeah.
and it's the female pop music from the late 60s, and they had these little bob haircuts. That,
Wow.
There's this woman, France Gall, and I was like, oh, that is so cute. I'll never get another chance to do that such a cute haircut. And so, but anyway, in terms of how
that's this one?
That's that one.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting because it's kind of how she looks when she first appears in All-Star 58. She kind of has that kind of bob haircut.
And that's what we were referencing. Yeah.
Okay.
But with my as I told you, my imagination isn't the greatest, so I tend to use tons of reference.
Okay.
And it really helps me to get where I'm going, to see lots of pictures. And in that case, I had a bunch of pictures of France Gall in real life. So it's not artist's interpretations, it's like that. I tend to use real world reference, even if I'm doing a fictional character.
Right.
Except when it comes to the portraits. It's funny, a lot of people say, ooh, that looks like so-and-so, ooh, that looks like so-and-so, he must have been looking at a lot of so-and-so. I almost never look at real people for the portraits.
Well, the funny thing about that, if I can just interject
Go
for a
ahead,
second,
please.
On Rogue,
Yeah.
there are 4 different actresses that people swear you based that statue on.
I know, and they're all
totally
different. I know. I laugh at that whenever I see that, but I mean, I'm, no, and I promise I didn't look at any of them. As we talked about earlier, Ian and I have a way of doing it. So I'll give him a rough draft, just by looking at the comics, and he brings so much. I can't even tell you. Like, every time I'll send him one, I'll be like, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And I'll send him back, and I'm like, hell yeah, just like that. If we get halfway to this, we're golden. And both of those, that's what happened with both of these portraits.
So Harley seems like kind of a smash up of her from comics, from animation, from movies. I don't know if you were thinking that or not, but I don't pick this portrait as coming from any particular media. But altogether, I'll tell you one thing, it's one of the most photogenic portraits out there.
Oh, cool.
Even an amateur photographer like me took some killer pictures of that portrait.
Oh, awesome.
It's really, really beautiful.
I appreciate that. I really was fond of and proud of the kissy face portrait.
Right.
Like that. I don't know. That was just. I was really charmed by that face. But thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's the same portrait. We just adjusted the mouth. Pretty much.
So how about figures? How do you think about pose on these 2?
Let's see. This one, Power Girl, was a case where it was pretty well designed when it came to me, and so we would adjust a few things. I'm debating.
What you can say, what you can't.
I
will say this: it feels like Sideshow is becoming more and more daring as far as engineering.
Yeah, we're definitely we understand that there are other companies out there, and other options and whatever. The way I think about it is, most people have the opportunity, if they're lucky, to buy a couple of figures, maybe just one of their favorite figure. Yeah. And if Power Girl, or whoever it might be, is my favorite figure, and I'm gonna save up and plunk down a bunch of money, we want it to be the only one that they'll ever need. You know what I mean? Like, now there may, we may come up with another one 3 years down the line, or 5 years down the line, or whoever, but at the time, you want it to feel like, I don't need another one. You know what I mean? Like, and that's it's hard to do. And you know, do we hit it every time? Probably not. But
I do appreciate that she's the exact same height as Superman.
We had them the files together, so we were, you know, we wanted them to be companions, and Batman too, actually.
Yeah.
Those three. Well, and Wonder Woman. Yeah.
Sure.
You know, we don't expect people to buy them as a collection, but it's nice if they work well together.
I didn't intend to have a collection.
I mean, Steve Lord, another just brilliant sculptor, did Superman, and that's tough to beat, dude. I mean, that's good.
Yeah, you know, Superman statues come out all the time, include like the Prime One Hush and some beautiful statues, but I can't find one that beats that.
Yeah.
And so I'm probably never going to replace him.
You didn't ask, like in all your questions, which figure would I be afraid to do? And that's Superman. I've never done a Superman.
Really?
And I'm afraid to do a Superman. Like, there's so much
history,
and he's so specific, and
Yeah.
I think he would be my last choice. I mean, at the same time, he might be a first choice, but like, I'd be so petrified of a Superman. It's never come my way, so, you know.
Well, I think you should do a Martian Manhunter.
He's cool.
Because I think it would be awesome if Sideshow would complete the original 7 JLA members.
Yeah.
And that's all they got to do. That's the last one. So it'd be great if they could do a Martian Manhunter. How about Harley's pose? How did that originate?
I think that there were a bunch of, if I remember correctly, it's going back a ways, there were a bunch of thumbnails that we were looking at that people were, you know, that the designers were sketching. And I remember that this one was the one that spoke to me. Okay. And so I was like, we got to do this one.
Right.
I think originally she was just standing on her skates. I mean, the costume design was designed, you know, and chosen by the design team. Sometimes it isn't, or sometimes it evolves or whatever. But they knew that this, as you said, kind of specific version of her was the one we were going for. And I think, if I remember correctly, that I said, well, we got to have her on her toes, you know what I mean? Because that's just, you know, she's like standing on her bumpers.
Yeah.
And it lets you do things with her pose that I thought would be appealing. Yeah. It gives her this arch, and there's some gesture that comes from it that's fun. And I actually think the over-the-shoulder look is cute. You know, I mean, there's something playful about that and sassy that worked with her character really well. And so that was another thing.
It's a design that I expect to see on the nose cone of a B-1 bomber.
Right. Oh, yeah. Totally pin-up kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, or on the hood of a Roadster.
Yeah.
You know, it totally works. I remember when it was first revealed, before we had all the specs, people were saying, oh, that jacket has to be fabric. There's no way you can do that. So, was that difficult?
Engineering-wise, it was very tricky. And honestly, this is one that Kat painted. I don't know how she made that look so much like satin. I mean, that really worked well. That was there was a lot of reference involved. Lots of pictures of a woman at work in that pose. That one's one where I directed the picture taking.
So it wasn't you picture?
No. I didn't have. I wasn't doing my little slinky look. Yeah, because I thought, well, it's a coat on her elbows. You know, that's not going to be too tricky.
Right.
But the way it folds and turns inside out, I was like, okay, I'm lost. Because I tried to do it before we did the pictures and stuff. Yeah.
It's wonderful. I really love it.
Thank you.
So how about the bases? Are we going for is this like roller rink, or what exactly are we going for?
Yeah, that was, they were referencing the look and, you know, the neon and stuff like that of that would have been, you know, roller rink and of course, you know, floating through the clouds. That's a tough one. It's tough to pull off water, smoke, fire, clouds, all that kind of stuff. Because they are they are stylized by definition. I mean, like, fire doesn't have a particular shape, so it's going to be a stylized, interpretation of fire or smoke or whatever. Right. And getting that right is tough. But
they did it good with the smoke on the Iron Man.
That's yeah. You know what? That's so good and so on the nose. Legacy did that. I wonder if they didn't use a dynamic simulation, since they're so connected to the movies, and it's really, I don't know. I mean, if it's hand done, it's brilliant either way. But I've explored some of that. I'm trying to think of when I've done. On Wonder Woman's Flames.
Yeah.
Those are actually dynamic. That was the first time I tried that. I made a dynamic simulation of fire and then just froze it and then converted it to.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
I was like, I wanted to look like, not just, anyway. So yeah, that was an experiment. I thought it looked kind of cool, and the flickering it turned out really cool.
It's awesome. I love it. So, what goes into deciding whether or not there are going to be fabric elements or not? The last Power Girl had a fabric cape. This one has it sculpted.
Right. Sometimes usually those decisions are made in the design phase, and it's oftentimes practical. You know what I mean? It has to do with the size, the weight, and the packaging and stuff like that. Sometimes, we can do different things with packaging and design. So it isn't really my area of expertise. But I can say this: we did a project. This was an eye opener for me. We did a project a number of years back, and it was a big piece.
Yeah.
And it had a circular base, and we got some advice from production that we should trim off the first third of the circular base. And I was pushing back. I'm like, but the aesthetics look good. This has a nice composition to it.
Right.
And they said, well, if we leave that front on there, it gets past what we can fit into a single box.
Oh, I see.
It'll be 2 boxes, and it will double the shipping cost.
Right.
And I was like, asymmetry really speaks to this character a lot. I mean, I think we can really bring out a lot of the personality of this character by the asymmetrical use of that. No. So I mean, things like that I never even thought of before.
Right.
It's not just the weight. It's not just the size. There are a lot of things involved in making those decisions, and like I said, I'm not always, even though I've been there for all these years, I'm not always privy to all of them. But I do know when I have been made privy to them, you always go, oh, dang, okay, well, wow, okay, yeah, I didn't know that.
I think about the Ahsoka premium format, which is currently up for pre-order. Her pants are just there's a real detailed pattern to them.
Yeah.
So I imagine maybe that's why they went fabric on those, because it would have been kind of difficult to paint, I imagine, on a grand scale.
Sometimes that is a factor, no question about it. Sometimes, if it's such intricate design, it can't be painted. Well, another example is fishnets.
Oh, right.
Are almost always going to look better as a cut and sew element.
Right.
Because you just can't. They can't be painted. I mean, by anybody really. I mean, there you go. That looks great, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. Black Canary, I think, is one of the most underappreciated premium formats Sideshow's done in years.
That's Steve Lord again. That guy's a beast.
She's not even a character I necessarily needed in my collection, but the piece is so awesome.
Yeah.
I had to get it.
Oh no.
So fishnets, we should talk a little bit about Zatanna.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, maybe your most recent.
Yeah, that's one of them. Yeah.
So, the engineering on that seems like it's going to be really interesting. Can you talk a little bit about that? And
it's currently in production, and so I can't comment on exactly what it will be, but we can definitely think in terms of Rogue. It's in a way. I mean, from the point that long before it leaves my hands, we are thinking about engineering all along, and we have some options, and it depends on, what makes most sense, and oftentimes trying to keep pieces reasonably priced is a factor.
Yeah. I think Sideshow, and I don't have no inside knowledge about this, have been really smart to try to stay within that 600 to 650 range when all the other statue makers are going to 1,000 and beyond for quarter scale. It really helps collectors like me, and they're still putting out great product at that price range.
That's the thing. We've tried to not think of it as a limiting thing, but as an incentive to be more creative or clever. You know what I mean? And Tom Gilliland, our one of our owners, is definitely harps on that. Like that. Don't think about what we can't do. Think it's a challenge, because anybody can make. Well, I shouldn't say anybody. It's easier to make a $2,000 statue that looks great, than a less expensive statue that looks great. But it's possible. It requires you to be more clever. And I think about and in no way am I comparing anything that we do to the classical artists, Michelangelo and things like that. But I've heard people say that the constraints on what he could paint or sculpt and where and for whom were really severe. Like his subject matter was dictated by the church and other places. And yet somehow he was still able to find terrific creativity within those constraints, because he was clever and a genius and one of the great artists of all time. And so, in our own little way, I try to think about that. Like, he didn't. I'm sure he complained, but still was able to think outside of those constraints. So we try to do that too. We want to give people a reason to fall in love with what we do, and we try our hardest.
Right. So maybe this is an example of that, but we've had, I think, 5 statue reveals in the past 9 months or so with forced perspective bases.
Right.
Is that kind of in that line of thinking of trying to find new ways to present material but stay within a good price range?
Sure, that's part of it. I mean, it's also an effort to explore different territory, and collectors, totally understandably, think that collectibles are made for them.
Of course.
But they're made for all collectors, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And giving people variety and options and challenges, is something that keeps it fresh for an industry. And will all of our pieces moving forward be forced perspective? Absolutely not. I mean, there's just no way. Not even a large percentage of them. We did do that group kind of together, so they just sort of seemed like, oh, Sideshow is now doing all. It was just because we were working on those projects at the same time. They're meant to look good together, not necessarily, as I said, to be all collected as a collection, but they're meant to look good together. There's three Spider-Man World ones, Ghost Spider and Danny's Spider-Man and the Miles, those 3 in particular.
And then your Psylocke, and then the new Wolverine running.
Yep. And those 2 have a relationship, Psylocke and Wolverine, together. But I
think it works best on your Psylocke, to be honest.
I thought we did. It looks neat, I thought. I mean, so one thing I hope is that people will see it more in hand and be able to appreciate how cool it looks in hand, because
it's totally different.
Yeah, I know.
it's the reason why I really missed the last 2 Comic-Cons in San Diego.
Yeah.
It is the place where I make my final decisions on what to order and what not to order. Yeah. Because you just can't get it from the pictures online. Yeah. You have to see it in person, and I exclude pieces the same way. It's not just, oh yes, I'm going to buy it for sure. It's like, oh.
Now that I see it, yeah, of course, yeah.
But Psylocke was really impressive in person.
Oh, cool.
And I think it's one of the most beautiful portraits anyone's done.
Oh, cool.
It's
just
gorgeous.
Oh, thanks, man.
But thanks for giving your insights on these pieces.
Of course.
They're awesome.
That word.
All right, we're going to do a lightning round now.
Okay.
This is just silly stuff. I thought it'd be fun. Your teenage celebrity crush. Mine was the Bionic Woman.
Oh,
Lindsay
that's
Lohan.
good choice. That's a good choice.
Yeah.
Oh man, loved all that stuff. Sasquatch in like
Yeah.
Alien Sasquatch and $6 Million Man. I mean, that is so awesome.
But hopefully that wasn't your celebrity crush.
No. Oh wow, I had a lot. I really,
Linda Carter's a popular answer.
yeah, I liked Wonder Woman. I did like that. I have to think about that because there's definitely a right answer to this, and it's just she's not popping into my. I mean, like I loved Dejah Thoris. I mean that was like, but that not really a celebrity crush or or like a pop culture.
That works though.
Yeah,
it's a character. Let's move on.
Okay.
Favorite?
Not really lightning, really. If I like think about it and
No,
stuff
that's
too
okay. Favorite Spielberg movie?
Well, I can say I was always I love E.T. Now.
Right.
But E.T. bothered me personally for a stupid reason.
Okay.
Having been such a huge Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
Maybe you can relate to this. When we grew up, comic books you were ashamed of a little bit. I was.
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't have any friends that read them. You know, I was lucky if I could get my buddy to take a 3-mile bike ride to the spinner rack while he picked up candy, and I got comic books, and we agreed not to talk about it.
I paid my brother to take me to a comic shop.
Yeah.
My brother.
So, but when Star Wars came along, that was the first glimpse of like, I'd been in the comic books for a while, and the rest of the world kind of got it, and I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Now, so I was very proud that Star Wars broke into the rest of the world.
Yeah.
I found it at the same time everybody else, as I told you. But to me, I was like, it clicked with, like, this is my world, and you guys are getting a glimpse of it and stuff like that. So and it became the biggest movie of all time, and I'm like, see, I was right all along. I knew it. And then E.T. comes out a couple years later, and passed it in popularity, and I'm like, that little turdy looking alien. And so in my mind to this day, I've got this little hang up on that I can't quite appreciate E.T. for the brilliance that it is, because it knocked my Star Wars off the throne. But to answer your question, I love if we can call Indiana Jones a Spielberg movie. I mean, because I know it's Spielberg and Lucas, so totally. It's hard to beat Indiana Jones, and that's pretty.
I think Raiders is the perfect movie.
Yeah,
and it's the movie that I would most rewatch over any other, probably.
Oh wow!
It hits all the buttons. It just makes me happy watching that movie from beginning to end.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And I've heard the showrunners and creators of Stranger Things referencing all those Spielberg movies.
Yeah.
And, and they get it a little bit, because Spielberg challenged you, but never screwed you as a audience. You know what I mean?
You got the feeling he was one of us.
Yeah, and you could watch, like, you could go through a lot of emotions, good and bad and sad and happy, but in the end, you felt good about the experience. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's Stranger Things gives you that. Like, there are a lot of programs that are really good. This is the golden age of television. That are hard to watch, man. And I, like Kat and I will be like, that's hard to watch. Like, it's great. I know it's great,
right.
But I need a little mix. I need a little lightness and brightness and brightness and shadow and stuff like that. And Stranger Things, I think, really gets that with, like, there's some funny stuff in there, and there's some sad, anyway.
Well, that's something that Spielberg's done really well.
Genius of it.
He's given us both.
Yeah, right.
But you can always go back to Raiders and.
Yeah, and there's a lot of in one single piece, like Raiders. There's a breadth of stuff, but
yeah. All right, if time travel was real,
oh baby,
what time period and place would you visit first?
I'm really this isn't real, so if it was really, really real, I would go back to some important moments and find out what the answer is. But like, sure. If I just wanted to go back and have fun, because the like middle '60s,
okay.
That cross section between space race and the music and cultural things that were changing, and you got Mad Men and James Bond, but then you've got like Groovy and Austin Powers, and I love all that. There was so much stuff. There was like everything got thrown into the mixer and just like tumbled over, and I that really excites me. And I love all the style. I love the music. I'm most attached and connected to all that stuff. So it'd be, I don't know exactly where I would go. I'd have to pin it down to like 1969 to watch the Apollo, as an adult rocket take off or something like that.
I remember my dad calling me in for that.
Wow. See, I don't have a specific memory of that, unfortunately.
I don't remember so much watching it as playing in the front yard and my dad saying, "You have to come in for this."
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Wow, because you were young. You would have been
3 or 4.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Favorite late night snack? Peanut butter toast.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I'm addicted to pretzels. I literally have, at any given time, 3 or 4 different kinds of pretzels. Mm-hmm. Currently sitting next to my desk right now, I can picture it, are 3 different varieties of pretzels. And so that's my go-to. I don't know why.
Okay. All right. Well, I was going to ask you Star Trek or Star Wars, but obviously it's Star Wars. But do you have an appreciation for Star Trek?
Huge. And yeah, no, it's just through neglect that it hasn't come up in this conversation so far. Mm-hmm. Star Trek, I don't think I discovered until after I saw Star Wars.
Yeah.
But Star Trek was available.
Right.
You come home from school and at 4 o'clock every day was a new episode of Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I very much loved Star Trek. It, like I said, it filled in all the gap because you remember there was 3 years between or whatever.
66 to 68.
I mean Star Wars and Empire.
Oh, I see.
I mean it's forever. And then 3 years and that's forever. You got to be kidding me.
Sure.
So you had all, but and I really dug all of the current Star Trek stuff from Discovery to we are loving Strange New Worlds.
Have you seen the finale yet?
Yeah.
Finale was awesome.
I loved it. Yeah, no, so into all that stuff, and really wasn't sure. Just kind of between shows, and like I said, we were trying to catch up on some things, and we started off with I forget which one. I think we might have started off with Discovery, and we're like, dang, this is pretty cool, what I mean? And then Discovery, anyway, so it grew, and I've dug. We watched all of it now.
So I have an older brother, Mark, who's 10 years older than me. I have 7 siblings.
Wow!
Me and Mark are the only ones that are really into comic books and sci-fi and stuff like that. So when I was very young, he dragged me over the TV and introduced me to Star Trek. And we watched that original series over and over.
Yeah.
It didn't matter what episode was coming on. If we'd seen it 10 times, we'd watch it again. And we would talk about how, this is one of the really crappy ones, or this is one of the really good ones.
Right.
And if Balance of Terror came on, or...
Menagerie, baby.
Yeah, exactly. We'd be like, the one with Joan Collins, I forget what that's called.
Yeah, that was great, yeah.
Yeah, we'd be like, oh my God, this is one of the good ones.
Yeah.
So that really kind of brought me into sci-fi in a big way. So I'm a big fan of both Star Trek and Star Wars.
Well, and they're so different. They've satisfied such different needs. Star Trek is a bit more, I don't want to offend anybody because there's nuances, but it's a bit more science fiction, and then Star Wars is a bit more fantasy. The worlds cross over, but those are 2 solid places to go, and
Star
very
Wars
different.
Is more pure adventure.
Yeah.
Star Trek tries to get a little more cerebral, I think, and talk about our world.
Yeah.
If you could bring back one musician from the dead for one last concert and you're sitting front row center, who would it be?
My go-to is Led Zeppelin. I just missed them live.
They're still alive.
Yeah, well, but not together. You know what I mean? Yeah. No. And I saw Plant and Page in the '90s. I still have my shirt, Plant and Page.
That's awesome.
Which was great. That was so good. Yeah. Because that was as close as I'll ever be. But I missed them all together. And and John Bonham, of course, who passed away, is legendary. But John Paul Jones, I grew up. It was all about Led Zeppelin, and so it'll be tough to replace them, to see them.
Are you familiar with Harry Chapin?
Yeah.
So my brother took me to see Harry Chapin when I was very young, and it was the most unusual concert I've ever been to because it really felt like you were sitting around with extended family.
Oh wow!
Singing songs and telling stories.
What's his big hits?
Taxi.
Okay.
You know Taxi.
Yeah,
Taxi and.
He's not Cats in the Cradle. That's.
He is.
Oh, okay. I was just trying to connect. Yeah.
That's the big hit.
But
He died in a car accident.
Yes, on Long Island Freeway or whatever.
He was a notoriously bad driver and ended up dying in a car accident.
Yeah.
And I think I'd want to see him again.
Oh yeah.
Just because that was just such a feeling of home.
Wow.
With someone I had never met before.
Yeah.
Which was really unusual.
Yes, of course.
So it'd be really fun. Favorite comic book villain?
I'm trying to think if there's a better one. I know one popped right in my head to start off with. So, I love Kang.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And so when I found out that there's a good chance, I've been saying for like years, I'm like, Kang is coming, boys. Just you wait. And everybody laugh at me. Right. I'm like, no. I'm like, because, we didn't realize that Thanos was going to be who Thanos was when we did Thanos. I mean, we had no idea.
Right.
And so after that, they're like, who's going to be next? I'm like, it's going to be Kang. Kang? I'm like, you watch. It's going to be Kang. Kang is so awesome. I really, it'd be tough to beat. I want to make a Kang.
Favorite villain in all of literature? Would it be different or the same? Would it be Kang still?
No. I'm a huge, there you go. Moby Dick. I originally designed a white whale.
Okay.
I'm like, I couldn't get a whale to look right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I started thinking more abstractly about the sea monsters. And then, in the corner of the old maps, there were always like, beyond here lay monsters or whatever, you know what I mean? And so they would fill it in with these fantastical creatures that were sea monsters. And I'm like, well, that's really what I'm getting at. Anyway, so Ahab / Moby Dick, because they're both, I go back and forth which one is the villain and which one is not and whatever, but Ahab.
I bet Melville probably intended it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, for sure. So Ahab is the best bad guy of all time. Oh, I mean, like, come on, the lines from Khan in Wrath of Khan are lifted straight out of Ahab. I'll chase him round the cape and round the horn and round perdition's flames before I give up. That's Ahab.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great. Favorite city that you visited?
Venice.
Oh, I'd love to go to Venice.
Venice, I could live there in a second. Yeah.
That's awesome. Fictional city you'd most like to visit?
I don't know about city, but Ringworld.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Favorite novel? Would it be Moby Dick or something?
Yeah, that's
tough to beat.
Backstory. My mom read that to me as a bedtime story when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it connected to everything.
That's amazing.
As a writer and stuff like that. I remember literally listening to her read this to me, and understanding what a symbol was, because it was early on. They go. Ishmael goes to the Spouter Inn with Peter Coffin, proprietor. And I'm like, Peter Coffin. Oh, that's not just his name. That is there's a symbol there, and I'm like, oh, and I remember that clicking, and just anyway. So
that's amazing. At 7, it really is. Favorite graphic novel?
Could be
one of those. I don't know.
There's a lot of good ones out there.
Yeah.
I can tie the knot with Kang and Avengers Forever. I love that. I think it was written in 98, 99, and then the graphic novel appeared in 2001 or whatever. So, love Avengers Forever. And that's Kang being Kang.
I need to revisit that.
Yeah.
Movie that might have freaked you out as a child. For me, it'd be a horror movie, but it might be something different for you, if you had one.
I don't remember being freaked out. I remember some favorites and loving them. Like I can't remember being freaked out.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, you're on Mars.
Awesome.
In the fight of your life, Who do you want fighting at your side, John Carter or Dejah Thoris?
Well, John Carter, it would have to be John Carter because he had superhuman strength, being an Earthling on Mars. And so if I'm looking out for myself, now having a drink afterwards, maybe we...
And the last one, the best fan interaction you've ever had.
I quite liked our conversation when we bumped into. I mean, I really appreciated meeting you at Comic-Con and just chatting with you for a few minutes, and your wife and son were with you, and I just really dug that. That meant a lot to me because I'm just a guy doing his thing with nothing special, and I appreciated your interest. So that's right up there. That's the first thing that pops into my mind.
That's very nice of you to say. You want to walk out to the beach?
Sure.
Let's do it.
Even if we overpay